Thanks for joining us. So we're just gonna sit and have a conversation between the three of us. We're gonna try and you guys listen to news pods. You're listening to news podcasts in the UK, maybe elsewhere. We're gonna try and do this in the style of a news pod.
Are we?
I think, yeah.
Who's producing it?
They are. Yeah. So we're just going to chat through some of the issues around news podcasting in the UK, and talk about all of our different pods. Should we start by introducing ourselves, Tony? Do you want to go?
Hello. So I'm Tony Pastor. I'm the co-founder of Goalhanger. We make 11 podcasts, but the relevant ones right now for you are we make The Rest is Politics with Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, which is a twice weekly plus an interview pod on top of it podcast in the UK. And we also make The Rest is Politics US with Katty Kay and Anthony Scaramucci, which is also twice weekly and concentrates on US politics.
Hi, I'm Dino.
Well, we've already done classic news pods. You're meant to play a clip.
Oh, fuck.
You're meant to play a clip.
Oh, sorry.
Is there a clip?
Yeah, let's play a clip.
Exactly like a news.
Exactly. This is very news pod so far. This is actually exactly what a newscast recording is like.
Do you want to come back to it?
Okay, maybe let's come back to it. Go on, Dino. You introduce yourself. We'll play a clip in a moment.
So I'm Dino Sophos, the CEO of Persephonica. We are an independent production company based in the UK as well. In terms of what we make that's relevant to this session, we have a show called Political Currency, which is fronted by George Osborne, who's the former UK Chancellor, and Ed Balls, who's former Shadow Chancellor and Government Minister. So that's a weekly politics chat, and we'll play a clip later on from our spin-off format of that, which is an interview format. Also launched The News Agents, which with Global, which is the UK's biggest daily news podcast. Before that, I was at the BBC for 14 years, where I launched their news podcast division. So back in 2017, there weren't any news podcasts at the BBC. And I launched a podcast called Election Cast, which then became Brexit Cast during the Brexit referendum. And then we spun that off into a daily news podcast. And I was just remembering today that at Radio Days a few years ago, we announced that we were launching Americast, which is still a newscast, and Americast is still going strong today. So that's kind of, Sam, obviously, you run those shows now, but we work together at the BBC, so we've got previous.
Yeah, we've got previous. So I look after the news podcasts at the BBC. So that includes Newscast, which is our 7 days a week news podcast, Americast, as Dino says, Ukrainecast. We have an international news podcast called Global Story as well. And we've experimented with lots of other kind of short-form series and other types of news pods around the BBC. Should say at this point, we were actually meant to be joined by Alice from Tortoise, but unfortunately Alice had to go home for personal reasons, so she's not able to join us. I think we can now play some clips. Should we maybe do you want to just introduce this clip, Tony, and tell us a little bit about it?
So this is from the night of the US presidential election. We covered the election live from New York, combining the hosts of 4 of our podcasts. We had Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell from The Rest is Politics, Anthony Scaramucci from The Rest is Politics US, we had Marina Hyde from The Rest is Entertainment, and we had Dominic Sambrook from The Rest is History. And the idea was to basically show off the full range of hosting talent that we had available.
So, panel, one word. I'm starting with you, Rory. Harris or Trump?
Harris.
Okay. Anthony Scaramucci, Harris or Trump?
Harris.
Marina Hyde?
Harris?
Harris, but not sure. Dominic Sambrook?
Someone's got to say it. Trump.
Okay. Are you saying it because you believe it, or are you saying it because you think that we're a bunch of wet liberals down
Obviously a bit of both.
Yeah, okay.
But I think it is 50-50. I think it's too close to call. And Trump has a history in 2016 and again in 2020 of doing a little bit better in places where people don't expect. And I think given that, you'd be mad not to bet on him a third time.
Was that on telly as well?
That was on YouTube. So the point I wanted to make about this was that during the UK election, which happened earlier last year, as you know, we actually lent our hosts to Channel 4 TV, independent TV network in the UK. So Rory and Alistair went on their show that night, and we were paid for it. And that's the kind of traditional kind of thing to do, I guess. What happened was that Channel 4, for the first time, beat ITV, their big commercial rival in the UK, and they also found that the average age of their audience fell by about 10 years. So I thought, we really don't want to do that again. It was nice to be paid for our talent, but we'd effectively given a rival, and Channel 4 a sort of rival, we'd given them our talent and our audience. And so we said, come the US election, we would forego the guarantee of a license fee, and we would do it ourselves, and we would show the traditional broadcasters that we could go direct to the audience on YouTube, and 2.6 million people watched that show that night. So it wasn't a commercial triumph for us, but hopefully it showed that we can come and play on the same grass as the traditional TV broadcasters.
Do you want to introduce your clip, Dino?
Yeah, so the clip you're about to watch is from Political Currency. It's our spin-off interview format within the kind of, we do 2 episodes a week, but now and again we do special series. And what we were hearing from the audience is that our 2 main presenters used to run the country, like literally George Osborne was Chancellor, and in recent times as well. Incredibly plugged in. And what the audience really like is peeling back the curtain to understand how power operates, how the country is run. So we decided to launch these spin-off interviews where we invite people who also run the country. But the clip you're about to see here is from Michael Gove, who was the chair of the Vote Leave campaign running the Brexit referendum. And these 3 had all clashed during the Brexit referendum. And this was the first time they'd been in a studio together comparing notes. It's kind of the first draft of history. So it's history meets politics. Is it news? I don't know, but here's the trailer.
My single piece of advice to any future Prime Minister is never, ever have a referendum on anything.
Did you deceive David Cameron? Because in the Downing Street flat, you said you would not play a prominent role in the campaign, and you end up chairing the campaign.
If you don't do this, they'll have Farage on.
The real conversation we had, which was completely secret, was, do we go to Angela Merkel and plead, basically, for a final concession?
And then there was the argument, the fabled argument about £350 million.
Let's not rehearse it, but it wasn't accurate.
No, but the key thing, well, I think it was. However,
we have got to hit back at Boris Johnson and Michael Gove and these people. They're attacking us personally. We've got to take them down.
But you didn't. Sun headline, the Queen backs Brexit.
Oh, yes.
Reporting the Queen saying, give me 3 reasons to stay in the European Union. So, look, I've always wanted to know, who leaked it?
Well, Michael leaked it.
So that's the first time this stuff was being discussed by the 3 of them in the media. They would never do that in a traditional news interview. You just wouldn't get that access, and they wouldn't answer the questions with a straight bat. So, yeah, fascinating, I think.
So both of you guys, I hadn't actually thought about this. Both of you guys have got kind of interview spin-offs to your news pods.
Yes, so we do a podcast that goes out on Monday called Leading, and it gets fabulous interviews. We do 1 a week. And we spun it out of the politics show for a couple of reasons. One was that, as I've talked about earlier, the audience basically, we find, wants the 2 hosts together. They don't want guests, by and large. They come back for Alistair and Rory, for the relationship between them, for the tone of voice in that conversation, for the engaging warmth of the relationship. They don't want it messed about with by a 3rd person coming into it who is an occasional guest. However, it was too good an opportunity, given the black books of these 2 fellas. They can basically get anyone on. We've had 4 ex-prime ministers, Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, you name it, Hillary Clinton, we've had them all on. So we wanted a place that you knew what you were going to get, and that is an interview pod. It's the 2 guys interviewing 1 person each week, and they're fabulous. It is not as popular as the podcast in which just the two guys speak to each other. But it still does great business and gives us a great way of reflecting current affairs. So I saw this morning on the WhatsApp group, we were trying to get a Canadian on this morning to react to the news of Mark Carney's taking over the Liberal Party. And you can be really quick and react really quickly.
Who'd you get?
I don't know is the answer, because by the time I came here, Canada wasn't awake. We were waiting to see what we could do with the time zone.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting hearing you talk about, they don't want guests. Because, so we talk about that a lot at Newscast, and we use the phrase the Newscast family. Because, so at the BBC, we've got like hundreds of brilliant journalists, right? Brilliant journalists for television, brilliant journalists for radio. We don't probably have hundreds of brilliant journalists for podcasts. And, we're actually, the podcast medium is new. You have to be quite loose, you have to be conversational, you have to fit into the tone. And actually, what we have, instead of like 2 people on every week, is we have like a tight family of journalists who we know can come onto the program. And we know that the audience loves. And actually, that group of journalists is also quite small. And it's interesting. So the clip that I'm going to play now is a clip of Laura Koonsberg and Paddy O'Connell, who host Newscast at the weekends on Saturday and Sundays. And Laura is an incredibly established, really experienced journalist. But on the podcast and on this format, she's able to loosen up, and she's able to kind of talk about things in a way that she wants. So this next clip that I'm about to play is actually them. They recorded this on Saturday afternoon, kind of talking about the week that Keir Starmer had dealing with Donald Trump.
It was suggested to me a few days ago by a diplomat that Trump might be the best thing that could have happened to Keir Starmer.
Wow.
How could Donald Trump possibly be a good thing to have happened to Keir Starmer? Well, plenty of his allies think because the crisis internationally has given Keir Starmer a chance to step into the spotlight on the world stage, and he's handled it well, but also that this crisis and the handling of Donald Trump plays exactly to his strengths, to his ability to cut out the noise, focus on what really matters.
By the way, I should say, if anyone's got any questions, there are a few guys with microphones, so stick your hand up, we'll get a microphone to you, and we'll get to your question.
Can I just pick up on that?
Yeah.
I think you made the point about Laura, really big figure in the BBC. Laura's been doing that show for a while now. To quote Tony Blair, to quote David Cameron, you were the future once. Newscast was the future once. But now it is heart of the BBC's strategy, right? Yeah. It's like all of these podcasts that you've got are now a core part of and when we first started making them, we were kind of hiding in the back of a cupboard and people were telling us off for wasting the talent's time. It's a core part of BBC News strategy. How are you finding that on the inside of the BBC now?
So so a couple of thoughts on that. I think one of the big things that happened during the UK election last year was that BBC News almost kind of had a bit of an awakening and realized that Newscast, its daily news podcast, is at the absolute center of the offering and is as integrated into all of the systems in quite a different way to actually when we were working together a few years ago. Like, it's properly integrated. It's in all of the big meetings. It's in all of the conversations. They're talking about it around rollouts of big news lines. They're talking about it around deployments. And actually, deployments is the other thing that I think about with that statement, because I feel like when we started daily newscast, which was just as the pandemic was starting, the conversations that we were having were, well, let me just explain to you what a podcast is. Let me just tell you about Newscast. Whereas now the conversation that we have at the BBC is not, let me tell you about podcasts. It's, oh my goodness, I actually now need to convince you that Newscast is the podcast that you should be doing over all of the other podcasts that you could possibly be doing in the BBC and in BBC News. So actually the kind of, the challenge has changed a little bit. And I think actually the UK election was quite a kind of like centerpiece for that.
Yeah. I mean, the truth, I think, is also that if you want to get to the demographic that the BBC wants to get to, which is not everybody over 60, then eventually you've got to be in the world of podcasting because, we know that, the average age of our audience on The Rest is Politics is about 33, the average age. So, the vast majority of our listeners and viewers now, because, of course, the podcast is in full video, which we feel it has to be, the vast majority of the audience are in their 20s and 30s, up to about 43. So, you have to simply be in that space, or you're going to miss out on the future listeners, viewers for the BBC. It's inevitable. You have to be there.
Yeah. Was the I was talking about the election, but what were your lessons coming out of the UK election and US election, I suppose, over the past year or so?
It was really interesting. So for us, we're going to talk a bit about commercial now. I guess because BBC, public service broadcaster, just totally makes sense for you. There are interesting challenges in the commercial space. So we more than doubled our listenership on political currency during the point of the period of the UK election. Incredible, because people are just hungry for that news. Our sponsorships, our host reads completely died. Combination of
completely died?
Yeah, we lost.
Really?
We were filling our ad slots, so our pre-roll, mid-roll, post-roll. We were filling those really well, like the show's doing brilliantly. We double our audience, and our host reads disappeared. And that was a combination of things. It was brands being scared of politics during the election, and the Euros fell at the same time as the election.
Yeah.
So we were incredibly frustrated because we would doubled our audience, and then our takings during the election dropped. So it's a really challenging medium for the BBC and public service. It's a no-brainer. I get it, but there are challenges in the commercial sector.
There's a perceived toxicity that comes with news and politics broadcasting.
Yeah.
That means that many brands, however much you tell them, our tone of voice is to be diplomatic, to be civil, to be fair, to be reasonable. I mean, frankly, we're deeply centrist, despite which a lot of brands just said, no thanks, we're going to stay out of this. And I can see this, as Dino says, from both sides, because we were selling politics at the same time as the Euros. The Euros had an absolutely disgracefully good month, and politics was basically fell through the floor. So we could see absolutely what was happening. Brands were going, we love the footy, dead simple, lovely,
easy.
Gorgeous,
not
easy.
Not controversial, right?
Not controversial. Loads and loads of people coming together in an excited fashion. And by the way, lots of young male audiences who are hard to get together in big numbers, all listening to that pod. So our politics suffered as well.
Yeah. Sam, can I just ask you about visualization? Because Tony and I have been on panels talking about this separately today. So we visualized Brexitcast. It was the first time a podcast I'm aware of in the UK was visualized. We put it on BBC One, and it flew. We put it on after question time, and it had the overnights were 1.1 million, which was fascinating. And I think the BBC bosses were surprised about that. I remember at the time that the conversation, it sort of took them to put it on TV for them to take it seriously, which was, if I remember back correctly. And the conversation they had with us was, right, we're going to put this podcast in a studio. You're going to get makeup, floor manager, multicams. We're going to create a fake podcast studio in the TV studio. And I was like, no, absolutely not. You're going to kill it if you do that. There's an interesting conversation about visualization. I was like, no. So we basically rebuilt the radio studio and put cameras in there. And you used that until quite recently, I think. You still have a podcast studio. But is it still what's the visualization strategy now for your new
Yeah.
business?
I mean, it's I think all three of us got fairly similar strategy. It's put your big podcasts in front of cameras. Newscast is still on BBC One. Newscast still does really well on BBC One every week. We are now on YouTube 5 times a week. And we are thinking really carefully and being as kind of data-focused and creative as we possibly can around the format of that and the thumbnails and the copy and all of that kind of stuff. One of the interesting things around visualization, it's a bit in the weeds maybe, but people in the room might find it interesting, is we've completely changed our processes around visualization. So we now have a team of people, pretty much all of whom are making video as well as audio. We now have a recording process where actually we've basically just made it as easy as we possibly can to take film from the studio and put it into a place where you can edit it and you can publish it as quickly as you possibly can. Because a bit like you were talking about earlier around some of your other products, Tony, you know, it can take longer to edit video than audio. So actually, we've worked really hard around our processes to try and improve the kind of efficiency of that, and that's been a bit of a game changer for the team.
One of the most stressful times in my career, and there's been a lot of them, was we recorded the podcast at 6:30 p.m. On Thursday evening. And it had to be on.
That's newscast.
It had to be on BBC One at 11:30. So we had to turn around a TV edit in like 4 hours, which was incredible.
But we're still doing. I mean, those are the time. I mean, that's roughly the times that we're still doing it. I mean, it's. I mean, people like great producers at the BBC are really up for learning new skills, doing it differently, like mixing it up. And you know, it's clearly, you know, anyone who was in the Spotify session talking about visualization, anyone who's kind of like looking at metrics on YouTube, like, you know, it's doing really well. And since Newscast has gone on to YouTube 5 days a week, I mean, it's basically about 15% of our audience now, overnight. That just happened overnight.
We did a show last week. We often do our politics shows live on YouTube first, and then move them back across onto the audio platforms. And actually, those shows are doing bigger numbers on YouTube than they are on Spotify and Apple combined. It's a bit of a challenge because when you do it for YouTube first, it's frankly not as neat and tidy as it would be if we were making it for audio first. And so we're having to work out what level of compromise we're willing to have. You know, are we willing to strip the audio straight off a YouTube live show, put it onto an audio platform, and accept the fact that it's not quite right? Or are we going to delay a little bit and just tidy it up and clean it up? So these are the kind of questions we're having to answer. But the key point is, so many people are coming to the shows on YouTube that we simply have to be there. And it motivates us to do a lot of the stuff YouTube first.
Do you think your audience cares that much about the production quality in that respect?
I think they care about the audio, actually. I don't think they care about the video. I think on Spotify, all of our big pods are fully visualized. You can watch them as well as listen to them. And, you know, we leave in some jump cuts. We use a few editing devices to get through, you know, to help you through the process visually as you watch. But frankly, we are not doing it to anything like the standard, Sam, that your teams would expect if it's going to go onto BBC One. And most people don't care, you know. I mean, I was the classic user of my own content recently. I was shaving in the morning and I had our football pod on. I had it leant against the mirror and I'm watching it. I then went downstairs and I made the kids breakfast while listening to it. And then I walked to the tube station and listened to it. And then I got on the tube and I watched it again. And so one show I've consumed in multiple ways, and I just don't care. You know, I don't care whether I'm watching or listening. And I think increasingly that's what audiences are doing.
Talking about compromise and news podcasts is interesting, because when we launched the News Agents, one of the things we decided straight away was this has to be in people's feeds by 5 o'clock, because we are hitting that drive time commute. And before at the BBC, we were kind of constrained by when the presenters were available, because Laura and Chris were doing the 10 o'clock, 6 o'clock news. They weren't available after. So we had to just make that compromise. When we launched a daily news podcast for commercial purposes, we couldn't compromise on that. So we knew that to hit the biggest audience, we just had to be there by the time they got on the tube. So, which means publishing it with a lag on Apple by like 4:15. Really.
So do you think that's optimum? Do you think that's like better than publishing later?
Well, I think you make a call that you're either a morning drop or an evening drop. I think what's good about the evening drop is that the news cycle has played out during the day. Yep. So you are reacting to events. Now, quite often, we would have like a big thing that we knew was going to happen that evening, and we just had to make a call that we're going to publish at 5 o'clock as we normally do, and just tell audience
you'd never go past 5?
Sometimes you might do a double drop. So when like Liz Truss resignation stuff was happening, we published multiple podcasts because it was moving so quickly, and the audience have the expectation. Like I think we were the first people at election cast and newscast to do the emergency podcast thing.
I know it's all a bit cliched now, isn't it?
Sorry about that. Yeah, absolutely. We've stolen that wholesale.
No, it's fine, but it's great because that's the audience expectation now. Is like, we will tweet the presenters going emergency podcast.
Yeah.
And like they have an expectation that we'll ask for one and you'll deliver, which is incredible, right? Like it's just fascinating. So, but I think the compromise thing is you just have to accept sometimes if your presenters are on the move, they're not where they thought they'd be. The audience just want to hear their take, and they don't really give a toss, to be honest, if Laura Kuenssberg's on a plane and the audio quality is a bit rubbish. They'd rather just hear their take when they want to hear it.
Do you find when you do a double drop day that the second drop cannibalizes the first drop, or do you generally find that the audience doubles? And I mean, I think our experience is it's a bit of a mixed bag, and it kind of depends on the news.
Look at your listenership over that week, and it will be just like huge, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a big question here, because one of the things we've built our podcasts on is regularity. So if you listen to The Rest is Football, it's out Monday, Wednesday, Friday, always at 3 a.m. in the morning. As soon as you wake up, ready to go to the office or go to school or wherever you do, it's there for you. It's like, it's regular, it's scheduled, almost like traditional media is. But having said that, with our very timely podcasts, of which The Rest is Politics, UK and US are our most timely, we are frequently ripping that agenda up and saying, this can't wait till Wednesday morning or whatever it would be. It's just got to go out now, or it'll be irrelevant by then. So that kind of, it's urgent, it's timely, it's really newsy. We need to record it, we edit it then quickly, we accept some compromise, we get it out. Because partly what we're discovering, Sam, is that for our younger audience, they are using The Rest is Politics as their source of news. It's not just a reaction and analysis podcast. It's actually, what's happening in the world, what's happened in the German election, what's happened in the US. That's where they're getting their news from.
More so than that, though, like podcasts like yours are setting the agenda, frankly. Like sometimes like they're saying stuff which actually defines the conversation. Like it shifts the narrative.
And that is happening more and more. I mean, it's kind of interesting that how, all of our pods and a few others in the market, they are having moments where they are totally defining the agenda.
There's lots of really strange things happening as well, quite interesting things. So we, Alistair and Rory, I was going to say we sent them to Syria, but that's not quite true. They wanted to go to Syria, and they interviewed the new leader of the Syrian government, and that's caused a load of controversy in the last week, obviously because of what's happened since that happened. Serious violence in Syria, question marks about whether or not who's responsible, etc. But we went and interviewed the Syrian leader. We put that show out on YouTube, and you could toggle between English and Arabic. And the English version was watched 500,000 times, downloaded 800,000 times on audio in all the traditional ways. The Arabic version has been watched 1.3 million times, almost entirely in Syria. So that podcast, of course we have no audience in Syria, has algorithmically been discovered in the nation it was recorded in and has become the go-to way for Syrian people to hear their own leader speak. Incredible.
So we find with audiences on YouTube that because of the nature of the channel that we're on, and we talked a lot about channels actually in the podcast summit yesterday, YouTube channels. So we sit on the BBC News YouTube channel. And one of the kind of slight quirks of that is the episodes that do the best for us are international news. Sure. Yep. So actually we find our kind of bread and butter, Westminster, domestic politics, policy in the UK, actually doesn't do as well as geopolitics, America, international affairs, Israel, Ukraine, etc. Which doesn't in any way actually impact our editorial, but does impact how we are presenting things and how we are introing things and how we are titling and how, all that kind of stuff.
I've got one disturbing thing, I'll let you speak now, Dino. I've got one disturbing thing to tell you all, which is that 9 of our top 10 politics podcasts of last year had the word Trump in the title.
Yep.
Yeah. So you think, this comes up quite a lot. So Trump
bad for the world, good for business. Is that what you're going to ask?
Yeah. Good for business, yeah.
We saw that in like the first year.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The figures on Americas were insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a fascination, and people want to understand, and they want to come to people they determine to be reasonable to explain what the hell is going on.
Yeah, there was a period where politics looked very boring and safe, and we were all thinking, great for us, not so great for business. Can I just ask, we were having a fascinating chat about, given this is about the future of news podcasting, and like the subscription model, obviously not relevant to BBC, Sam, but for us as kind of independent producers who are making money from advertising. But
Although arguably, I mean, I think it would be great if the BBC moved into some interesting subscription models, especially around studios. Yeah.
But just how pivotal that is really to us, and the people who are subscribing to our shows. Like we just did our first with Political Currency. We have, like, you have multiple tiers for subscribers. So we have the ad-free. We have a tier called Kitchen Cabinet, which is basically like the God tier for our show. And people pay £20 a month, or like all up front £200 a year. And one of the perks is, I mean, they get a mug, and then they get invited to, like, once a quarter a live recording in the studio. And we had these people come to our studio for the first time, these subscribers. They were more impressive than the actual cabinet, the caliber of the people you're getting.
I believe it.
Fascinating. But they absolutely love it. And, like, for us, that's just so interesting how we grow our subscriber base, how we offer more to them, how we engage that community and have that relationship directly with people.
I agree with you, Dino. And one of the things that I would say about our politics pod is that because it is difficult to sell sponsorship around, there's no getting away from that. When we look at the CPMs and the sell-through rates on our pods, politics is at the bottom of that. Politics and history, frankly, are harder to sell than entertainment and sport, which are seen as safe and fun and easier to be around. One of the things that's happened is, because it's harder to sell sponsorship and partnership and advertising, we've had to be creative commercially. So we've built out subscription models. We do live shows, even do a bit of merchandise these days. But, effectively, we've had to be cute and clever, and we've had to rely on the fact that it builds a very loyal community of people who care about the pod, care about being around it. I mean, I went to a live show of The Rest is Politics when we very first did it live, and I remember talking to a few of the audience afterwards, and they said it's brilliant to come along and be amongst people who are a bit like me. It had a slightly cultish feel about it, and our history pods feel the same. But I mean, how are you getting on with the subscription model for your show? It's relatively new for you, right?
Yeah, it's relatively new. We had a lot of people subscribe by, and again, this is really interesting about where people are subscribing. So with the price of a cup of coffee a month, lots of people doing that on Apple Podcasts.
Yeah.
But we only just before Christmas introduced this Kitchen Cabinet, and we were like, who's going to pay £20 a month for?
Because that is,
it's a lot of money.
That's actual money.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money.
That's more than Netflix, more than Spotify.
But it's exactly what you say. It's about a community, and they're interacting with each other on page. So we do ours through Patreon, and we have a chat room on Patreon, and they're talking to each other about the episodes. They're suggesting questions. It's a completely interactive show, and effectively, it's people talking about politics.
It's more than the license fee.
Right.
You're charging more than the license fee for Political Currency.
I guess all I would say, and I don't wish to be controversial, is that it's entirely optional. They choose to
as is the license fee. Well, if you don't watch television and you don't,
it's not optional if you have a television in your house.
No.
I support the license fee. I think it's a good thing. But the thing about subscription is only. So we've got 6 separate subscription models across our pods. And the smallest one is 0.5% of its total audience is a member. So 1 in 200 listeners join. And our highest is 1.4%. So, 1 in 70 odd join. But because, as I say, with the history and the politics pods, it's hard to monetize them through ads and sponsorship. What happens is that 1.3 or 1.4% actually provides more than half the income of the whole pod.
Yeah, interesting. We almost made some headlines there with the license fee, by the way. We've got to be careful. Very news pods. I mentioned if anyone's got any questions. Do we have a question that anyone wants to ask, either for the group or for one of us? No. Does this happen in your Q&As for the rest of this
In our
podcast?
Q&As, we're completely overwhelmed. I mean, we get absolutely loads of questions.
Yeah.
Can I just to sort of take it into a different area? One of the things that's interesting is like I've had a lot of we have major news organisations, and I'm sure they come to us for help, and we do a little bit of consultancy. And
For like podcast consultancy, like help in what way? What do they need
so
help?
they're news organisations that have fallen behind. So basically, BBC got there like back in 2017. You got there in, when did you launch Rest is Politics?
2021.
2021, yeah. News agents shortly after. So they've had like time to establish a real audience, and they were there, right time, right place. And a lot of newspapers, major news organizations with huge budgets have fallen behind. And they're frankly livid, I think, looking at places like independent companies with like no budgets really, going, how can we get what they have?
Don't tell them.
Don't give them the answer.
Don't give them too much help. That'd be my advice.
Well, what's interesting is that I think that part of the answer is you're too late. And if you are going to do it, you have to do it. And it was one of the things we did with the news agents, right? Which is like, if we're going to enter this space where the BBC is already a key player, you have to have a major talent, which is why we went in with like Emily Maitlis, like big, huge talent acquisition, and like be unmissable, be everywhere. And some of the news organizations are doing like quite half-baked strategies, I'd say.
So, I mean, it's interesting. Like, are people too late? If you were to... And we're coming to the end of our session, so I don't want to kind of start a new conversation. Let's maybe try and find some way of concluding it. Like, if you were to launch today, what would you do? What would you do differently?
Well, we're launching podcasts all the time, and we're finding audiences for them. So I don't think it is too late. I think anybody here who wants to launch a politics/news podcast can definitely do so. It's about whether or not you've got the right tone of voice would be my number one thing. Saying, are your hosts pleasant and fun and interesting and challenging and all the things that they would need to be? You have to have personality. We got approached recently by, massively indiscreet, by Kemi Badenoch's team, the leader of the Conservative Party, but about coming on our politics pod, and we'd be very keen for that to happen. But the rules and the way they want to approach it mean that it's just not interesting to us. I mean, if you look at the way the likes of Trump and Vance and Musk have gone on the big American podcasts, they've gone on and they do an hour and a half, 2 hours, and they talk very openly and honestly. You might not like what they say, but you get a very strong sense of who they are and the personalities. They are not trying to control every little bit of it. And if they're going to, and if the leaders in the UK of British political parties want to come on with a very controlling approach to it, it'll never do any, it won't do any audience, and it won't do them any good. They're going to have to embrace the medium, which is a conversational, more honest, authentic approach. And if they don't do that, it won't work.
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting spaces at the moment, if you look at just what happened in the US election with the right-wing podcasts, we just don't really have an equivalent in the UK. And I think I heard somebody the other day saying, I'm amazed Nigel Farage doesn't have a podcast. And I'm like, yeah, I also think that's... And I know...
Do you think that is that a comment on news podcasting being a bit left of centre at the moment?
In the UK, they are, for
In
sure.
the UK.
Centrist, I would say.
Yeah.
Centrist, maybe centre-left. Yeah,
centrist. And there are like, Politics Joe and like some of the smaller ones and Pod Save the UK, again, but there's nothing really that's massively cut through in that centre-right space. And I think that's a really interesting opportunity. Is the audience there? Are they too old to be listening to podcasts and actually they listen to traditional media or the radio? So I think that's an interesting challenge for the UK, for the future of the UK market. But yeah, each market is different.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think at 27% penetration in the UK, I think there's plenty of room for growth, isn't there? And I think, like you're saying, it's just about finding the right space. And I mean, you kind of talked about budgets and you can get into the space with not very much budget. You do need talent, right? You've got to do it with talent, and you've got to pay for talent either through rev share and your model, or through just having some cash to pay some talent.
But the only thing I would say about that is that our biggest podcast is a history podcast. It's called The Rest is History. Dominic Sambrook and Tom Holland. And those two could have walked down the street in London in 2020 and nobody would have recognized them. So if you get the right talent and you find the right combination, it really can work. They don't all have to be huge. I'm a massive believer it's about tone of voice, warmth, engagement, and the fact that the audience wants to spend time with your talent. That is the number one requirement for me.
Absolutely. And I think in the, like, back to my point about it's too late, just a caveat that it's too late if you're doing it half-assed, basically. If you're going in there and thinking, oh, we'll just like look at, you know, the news agents or newscast or whatever, and you just think we'll just replicate that without its own USP and its own brilliant talent. And crucially, discovery. Discovery is a lot easier for you now because you've got this amazing network and you can push your audience places.
Absolutely.
But if you don't have that concrete foundation of a new audience, it's incredibly challenging. So you've really got to think about that if you're launching a new show as a commercial radio organization or a news organization or individual production companies.
Well, this has been the opposite of half-assed. I've enjoyed this. I feel like I've learned a few things. Good name for a podcast, yeah. Guys, thanks for sitting and listening to our kind of Newspod's ramblings. I hope you enjoyed the session. If you go on Swapcard, you can actually rate the session, so you can let us know what you think of it. And actually, I also sit on the Radio Days program team and help curate a lot of the sessions here, and we do take that feedback really seriously, so do let us know what you think. Thanks, Dino. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Well, I think we're in good hands. Tony, Dino, Sam, thank you very much. I like the rating at the end, Sam. Very smart, very clever. Right, 15 minutes, and the last session here this afternoon is going to be with Dennis Clark, who was brilliant in the summit. If you did catch him on Sunday, the programming summit, Dennis Clark on full service personalities, and we all need more of those. That'll be at 5 o'clock right here.